In this video, we're going to see how computations that we would usually perform using a list in Python can be done using an array in Java. In Python, we use a list for a sequence of arbitrary values. The values might all have the same type, so here we have a list of integers, a list of strings, but they don't have to. They can be of mixed types. Java has a similar construct known as an array, but in an array, all of the elements must have the same type. More generally, arrays are less flexible than Python lists, and they have less built-in functionality. But we're going to see there are ways around that in Java. What's nice about arrays is they also have less overhead than Python lists, and it's easier to use them efficiently, both in terms of the memory that we're using and even in some cases in terms of the time that our code is going to take to execute. When we use a variable for an array in Java, like any other variable, we have to declare it. And here's an example. I'm saying I want this variable temps to be an array variable, and the way that I'm saying that is by using brackets. And those brackets go after the type of the individual elements. So here I'm saying I want this variable temps to be an array of integers. Okay, so let's look at some comparisons between working with a list in Python and working with an array in Java. So you can see I've got a list of temperature values here, and then I'm doing a bunch of things with that list. Here's the corresponding Java code fragment. As usual, we have to end the statements with semicolons, we have to declare our variables, note the brackets for the array variable. Some other differences, if you look at it, you'll see that Python is using brackets both to index into the list, but also to surround the list literals. Whereas in Java, we still use brackets for indexing, but for array literals, we use curly braces, as you see up here in red. In Python, we are able to have negative index values. So here I'm using -1 to get the last element of the list. We cannot do that in Java, and so instead we need to do some type of computation that will give us the index of the last element. And I'll show that in more detail in a moment. Other differences: to get the length of the list, in Python we use the len function and we pass in the list, whereas in Java there is a length value inside the array. It's actually a field or an attribute of the array, and we get it using dot notation. So in this case, temps dot length is giving me the number of elements in the array. And it's worth emphasizing here that this is not a method. It is, as I said, a variable, an attribute or field. And the reason this is important to emphasize is with strings, length is a method, and so you would have to call it, and therefore there would be parentheses after length. But here, when you're working with the length of an array, there are no parentheses, because you're just saying I want the value of that variable. One other difference: if I print a list in Python, I'm going to see its contents. But in Java, that does not work. And the reason for that goes back to the fact that arrays are objects, and therefore the array variable is not storing the array itself. Rather, it is storing a reference to that array, and remember, references are just memory addresses. Thus, when I execute this line from our example, the variable temps is in one place in memory, the array is somewhere else, and the variable holds a reference to the array, which we indicate using an arrow. And when we print an array, we're going to see a value that is based on that reference, on that memory address. So when I print the variable temps, I might see something that looks like this. This hexadecimal number here is based on the address of the array. To show you what to do instead, I've taken our code fragment, I've put it inside a main method, and then inside a class. In order to see the contents of our array, we're going to take the array and we're going to pass it in to a special method called toString. It is a non-static method, and it is in the built-in arrays class. Notice the S. That's a class of non-static methods that we can use to manipulate an array, and it comes built into Java. However, in order to have access to that arrays class, we have to import java.util, which includes that class, and so that will allow the compiler to find that class. Now let's trace through the entire program to see what we're going to get. And I'm going to show you down here what's happening in memory just to reinforce everything that's going on. So we run our program. As usual, we start with the main method, and the first thing we do is we create our array. So here it is in memory. Again, it's not inside the variable. What we assign to the variable is the reference, and I'm showing that with the arrow. Okay, then our next line says take the value at position 0 of the array, which is the 51, and copy that value into the variable first. And so we're going to see that down here, first is now 51. Then we're using the length field inside the array, and we don't typically show that length field, but it's there. It's inside the array. Every array knows its length. And in this case, that length is 5, and we're storing it in the variable numtemps, and so numtemps is now 5. And then we're going to use numtemps in this next expression to figure out the index of the last element of the array. Because numtemps is the length of the array, numtemps minus 1 will give me the index of the last element. So in this case, numtemps minus 1 is 5 minus 1, or 4, and so it's going to be the same as having done temps 4. That gives me access to the 30, and I'm saying I want to take that 30 and copy it in to the variable last. And so last is now 30. Then I'm going to change what's in position 2 of the array. And notice how I'm doing that. I'm assigning to a particular position of the array. So I'm saying take that position, which is currently filled with 36, and replace the 36 with 40. So the 40 is being stored in that position of the array. Here is a line in which I am changing what's in position 3 of the array, but this time I'm basing the new value on the old value because I'm using the plus equals operator. So I'm taking the current value, which is 29, and I'm replacing it with a value that is 5 more than that, or 34. I'm then printing what's in position 3 of the array, and here I don't need to do anything special because temps3 is just an int, and I can print an int anytime I want to. And so I'm going to see the 34 as the first line of output, and then I make this special call to arrays.toString. It turns the array into a string that I can then print, and I'm going to see it down here. And you'll notice that for some reason the string that is returned by arrays.toString is surrounded by square brackets rather than curly braces. But the important thing is it does show us the elements of the array separated by commas.